one thing I see people make mistakes on now the most is you spend all this time and effort acquiring, developing it, and then you don't focus on the deal making. And so when it comes to deal time, they'll give away like a huge rent.
Welcome to Beyond the Blueprint, powered by Contractors, Closers, and Connections, Orlando. Join me for in-depth interviews with some of the top commercial real estate and development executives in the industry. We uncover their success stories, their strategies, and their lessons learned along the way. Gain valuable insight whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out. Welcome back, Beyond the Blueprint. We are sitting down with Todd Watson at Cadence Partners, a former attorney turned real estate developer. So we have the pleasure in episode 1 to learn about Todd and all the stuff he's doing. Todd, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we should have mentioned more about me, but no, I appreciate the intro. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to kind of the audience and figure out if I can help others. I think that's part of the fun is once you supposedly get to the point that you know what you're doing, you can kind of help others. But yeah, I appreciate it. It has been every year we talk about this, right? It's the craziest year ever, and then next year will be the craziest year ever. But appreciate the opportunity to be here.
It's like we're treading water at this point. You know, it's like your muscles have developed now. You just kind of
yeah, right. Muscle memory. I wish it just each year. But that is we were talking earlier, obviously before you did the intro, and it's that's the greatest part about development. There's no day's the same, and you're going to use something different every moment.
For sure. So we'll do like just a quick background story of like who you are. Yeah. We can go back as far as you want. We can come up to current day, and so we'll let you take it away from there. So
yeah. So I'll just talk about the good stuff maybe. Sure. From Jacksonville, Florida. Okay. Don't make it up there much. I think there's a natural desire to get out and see the world. I just happened to go all the way from Jacksonville to Orlando, so you can tell I really made my way around. So got out of went to most of school in Jacksonville. Actually went to a military school for high school in Alabama, which was very formative and kind of the way I planned my life and kind of gave you that first glimpse of, okay, I can know what I'm doing. Always wanted to be an attorney because my dad was one. Passed away when I was really young. So for me, it was kind of the dream, like, okay, if I can do this. And I talked to my daughter the other day about stuff, and I was like, it's just a dream. You make a dream. It doesn't mean you're going to hit it every time, but it's the goal, and it helps get you there, even in the rough times. So went to military school in Alabama, went to Florida State for undergrad, Florida for law school, because that's, again, what I always wanted to do. Got here straight out of school. Practiced at a small firm. They were great, but I was doing everything. I mean, it was a dog bite case 1 minute, and then the next minute I'm drafting a lease. So not necessarily what you want to do when you're fresh out of school. You'd like to kind of figure out what you're doing and stick to that. Sure. And then went to a bigger firm, Broad & Cassell, worked there for about 2 years. So, and then realized, wow, I just spent all these years of school and I don't like what I'm doing. And I don't want to, and really, what it came down to is you'd be in a closing and there'd be a broker that'd walk in and pick up a check for $100,000. And I'm like, he just made twice what I did. And I'm smarter than that guy, even though you weren't, but you thought you were, because I was 5 and I knew everything. And so that kind of started, and I was like, okay. And some of the stuff you work on, like real estate transactions, you'd say, okay, how do you go out and find a piece of dirt? How do you find some release space? Yep. And so that just triggered it all.
So then from you leave the law firm and then you go into brokerage, right?
I did. So one of my clients at the time was a great family in town, the Battalias, and they owned some real estate up in Maitland, and then they owned some real estate in Winter Park, the 250 Park Avenue building that got redone. And so they were partnered in a JV with Lincoln at the time. And so the good part is they needed somebody to do their leasing, like literally the broker. And I didn't know what I was doing, but they said, hey, you've just get out there and smile and shuffle. And so I owe a lot to specifically Bill Battaglia brought me along and really gave me the opportunity and said kind of like to them, hey, you're going to hire him. Now there's a guy over at Lincoln, Scott Staley, who really knows what he's doing. super driven dude
Mm-hmm.
too. And I was extremely driven. Didn't know where I was driving again,
Right.
but just driven.
Just going forward.
Yep,
Somewhere.
I'm going somewhere, you know. And so bull in China shop. So he kind of helped. Okay, slow down, man. Where, you know, here's what you need to do next. And there's a few other brokers there. And so it's just a great environment to see, because not all brokerage companies have got that development component.
Sure.
So he did it all. So it was good to be able to kind of, okay, I like that. I like that. And then from there, so did office leasing really for 3.5 years, and then shifted over to a REIT called Liberty Property Trust, who now no longer exists. This is going to be a common theme today, because it seems like every company I worked for in my early years got bought out, or none of them went bankrupt. Let me just be clear. It's not my fault.
That's better. Right?
It is. So, and then worked at Liberty and did office and industrial. Back then I thought industrial was for people that weren't very intelligent and could barely, you know, because if you look at if you're a broker, right, and you're trying to make some money, why would I go do a warehouse lease where you only make $4 a foot net, and then figure those versus office, you're making at some point like 22, 23, you know, a foot, and then you calculate the commissions off that. So I'm like 4 times the commissions. I'll take that
Office
number.
Is
4 or 5. Yeah, I like multiples of 4 and 5. So, but the funny part about industrial is it's turned on its head, and now I've got some leases that are higher than office space.
Wow.
So the world has changed a lot.
So at your time at the doing brokerage, you know, you got to see kind of an inside look at development. Was that kind of formative for you in a way of like getting an understanding of wanting to be a developer and like really starting to develop a passion for real estate in the process, or was this before?
No, it was at Lincoln, because I think so a couple of things, you know, Scott and Lincoln and this guy's you've got to have like 5 skill sets that are pretty well developed before you can really go out and do your own thing.
Sure.
And I didn't know that at the time. So
what are those 4 skill sets?
Yeah. So, you know, if you think about it, you've got to be able to go acquire.
Sure.
And so then so that's an easier one for probably most of us.
Mm-hmm.
You just make some phone calls, go look at property. But then the second the dog is chasing the car at this point, right? It hasn't caught it. Dog chasing car. Okay, I like that piece of real estate. So I always have a saying, and that is you gotta love it with your heart, but prove it with your head.
Sure.
Right. So the numbers. And so then the second skill set you got to have is the numbers. If you don't understand how to really analyze real estate, you can get a little ways.
Right.
And I've seen some people get pretty far without really knowing how the numbers work.
Sure.
But ultimately, you've got to do that to get the equity to fund your deal. So that's the second piece. Third, I think, is really understanding construction, and that includes some design, because great real estate, great developments are well designed. And that comes from some of my time. I was doing some retail for a little bit too, and understanding the site and how, you know, layout, configuration, drive, visibility, you know, just kind of, it's amazing. You and I can go look at an office building, 2 right next to each other, and just because this one's got better access or better, sometimes curb appeal, tenants go to that one, right? So that's kind of your third one is the construction design. I think the fourth one is really you've got to learn how to manage these things. And so one thing I see people make mistakes on now the most is you spend all this time and effort chasing, acquiring, developing it, and then you don't focus on the deal making. And so when it comes to deal time, they'll give away like a huge rent if that's driving what you're trying to do, or they'll give away, you know, so in other words, rental rate, free, you know, all the concessions you give, free rent, too much TI. I mean, these are all things that can change your pro forma and make a good investment terrible.
Right. Well, that kind of goes into the financing part of the deal, right? Being able to underwrite.
Yeah,
the
and
deal.
that's number 5.
Yeah.
And number 5 is you've got to go find equity.
Sure.
And and it's kind of what I didn't know back then is just, you know, the entire capital stack, right? So it's one thing to go out and find friends and family.
Right.
But if you're doing something of size, and unfortunately everything we're kind of running into now, I miss the old days where you could call 2 or 3 friends and you could raise $100,000 and buy something.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That's
just,
not today.
yeah.
Well, I think especially, I've also seen, professionals or brokers, they have the ability to acquire. They have an ability to find a buyer, but understanding, I think those last part, one, how the deal pencils out, and then also, the equity piece of it. And even design and construction, I think there's an element of value that if a broker really understood those things, it would allow them to get a lot further in brokerage because now they understand the deal from start to finish rather than just saying, hey, I got this piece of land, you want to buy it, and letting the owner do that. Would you say that that's a value add that you were able to provide as a broker by understanding that?
Let me be clear. I was a broker for a very
Yeah.
short period of time, in the strict sense of like a third party. Now, when I was working at Liberty, I was in-house leasing, so that was good. But yeah, I still see it every day now, and that is if I'm interviewing brokers and you talk about how do you approach deals, and so one broker will do a great job of figuring out the construction costs of that tenant wants to come in and take the space, and they'll chase down the number, and here it is for you. And this on the leasing side, I'm kind of talking to. Same thing on the land side. I have so many brokers bringing you land, and they'll just go, here it is. What do you think? And you're like, great. You just sent me a property card.
Right.
And I don't get upset about that because I don't. But what I'll say is, hey, if you can really help me, you got to get me a CAD of the survey. You've got whatever plans. What have they done? Any other inspections or reports? So yeah, that's important. And then the next step would be, like, there's a broker I've dealt with down in Miami, and this guy's name was Lee Katsikos. And Lee, when he brought you a deal, he, by the way, asked for twice the normal brokerage fee, but he would say, here it is. Here's the municipality. Here's what you can develop. I've checked on the wetlands. The wetlands, this consultant has told me you can mitigate them for X amount of dollars. We've even found the bank, the mitigation bank you can get the credits from. And so it's all packaged up. Same thing on the leasing side, right? There are brokers that'll bring you a deal and they go, oh, we got this RFP, like listing brokers for us. And you go, okay. What do you think about this, that, and the other thing? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Well, where else are they looking? I'm not sure. Well, what do you think these guys' credit is? No. Where they at currently? And that's when you start going, okay. And it's the brokers that, say, hey, they just lay that all out there. It's an email sometimes. Bo Bradford, Bobby Isola, these are the guys that, have represented us. And when they bring you a deal, it's cooked.
Right.
All your issues. And at that point, it's your decision.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big misconception, especially in the brokerage world. I think because it is commission based, you eat with your kill, you're trying to kill as fast as you can, right? So it's a lot easier just to go ahead and, here, on the podcast specifically, we always talk about how can someone in the commercial real estate and development industry, especially young, provide value, right? To people like yourself, to other developers. And I think that's a huge component, guys like Bobby and things like that can put the deal all together. And, it doesn't take a whole lot to understand how to put the deal together. Like you can watch some YouTube videos, have a mentor to try to figure out, okay, what things do I need? It's more effort to try to figure out what do you need. Go, solicit a general contractor, figure out how much it's going to cost to build it out. Go down to the city and get your, all your surveys and your CAD files and all that stuff. Rather than just, you don't have to be super tenured in the industry to know some of these things. It just takes a little bit of work, and that helps you get your deals done faster.
Absolutely. And honestly, what it comes down to also is, even if you are new, if you can find a great GC, if you can find, in my case, an architect like a Clark Stranahan, or a civil engineer like Sam Sabali that we use, they're going to help you get the answer faster. Sure. They've seen it that many more times. And so sometimes it just comes down to finding really great consultants, and that strengthens your position. So that's what I would tell people. If you really want to get good, find a site, or whether it's that or the lease or whatever, and go sit down, talk to maybe first that senior broker that's been around a long time, or if it's the land piece, if you went and cornered Sam and he's, some of these folks are not going to be generous with their time. I get it. But you can find the right time. And that's when you go from, okay-ish, you're stirring up the prospects, you're stirring up the business. How do you get it closed? That's when you become a closer.
Sure.
And that's tough.
So I want to get into, just to kind of piggyback on that, obviously, especially in this industry, relationships are uber valuable. But even being young, in the industry, but also, even in your position, how would you say that relationships have helped you and your career to develop, but then also, it could even be getting deals done quicker?
Yeah. So let's, right. How do you generate business? And I can kind of, let me talk about who I learned from early on, and then I'll kind of fast forward to today, because it's never the same. Yeah. When I was younger, it was funny. I worked for a really more senior attorney in town named Richard Swan. And Richard was probably the smartest attorney I've ever worked with. But when we sat down and talked, he would tell me early on, this is about generating clients, man. And so if you want to get that done every day at lunch, why are you going out with your coworkers?
Right.
You should be, trying to break new business. And that kind of got ingrained in me early. And then he also was smart about it too. And he goes, that lunch you're going to have may yield nothing. It may yield more. Have a story to tell, have something you want to talk about, so again, it's purposeful. It is marketing, but at the same time, met some great people that way. So early on, I think people have forgotten how the one-on-one works.
In substance conversation.
That's right.
You'd be, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but like how many like coffees or lunches that you have that, even me, it's like, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's very.
Are you talking about our coffee recently? No,
no, not ours.
Are you picking on me?
Yeah. But I think that it doesn't always have to be around work, and it doesn't always have to be around development and deals, but have something of substance. Like if I can provide you with a story that may render some value, maybe it's a deal that got done recently, maybe it's something down the street from one of your sites, or even like when we were talking off air, like about some of the municipalities and things that they're going through, I think having conversations of substance goes so much further than just meeting. And in my opinion, those conversations render future coffee and lunches with that person to help that relationship generate.
Absolutely. And it's amazing because even I'm supposed to understand the economy and interest rates and everything else, but it's fun to ask people, again, if I'm at a lunch and somebody's younger, it's still, if you ask people's opinion, it is amazing the perspective people have, and you forget. So yes, always. So that was number one. When younger, having a story to tell, having things to talk about, asking about, do you have experience here? What do you think about this person? And it just opens up so many conversations. And so that's, if you think about it too, I had this client at a law firm, and they became my client when I was a broker, and so it's all those relationships. And the cool part too, half the time there's not a direct benefit you can even see in the near future. It's just, this is somebody I met. They've got a really cool perspective. Or back then too, I would find a broker I heard that did a really big deal, and I'd just take them to lunch and go, okay, can you tell me about the deal? How did you get that client? Sure. And they'd tell you this incredible story. Right. And back then there were some characters too, because that's back when I was doing mostly office. And let's face it, the office brokers have much bigger egos and have
one of a kind.
Yes, much more fun than the industrial guys. Now I still have a bit of fun, but not like the office guys back in the day. Back then it was incredible. Yeah. So, and you had some legends hanging around, like Bill Moss. And
how do you know when you're like trying to pursue or meet someone? How do you know they have that? Because I'm a big proponent of perspective, right? There's an element of me that likes to just hear other people's perspective on different things. It could be one-sided or the other. It doesn't have to. It could be in the middle. It doesn't really matter. How do you know that early on? Whether like what in you generates that that kind of curiosity to say, hey, this is somebody that I want to continue a relationship with?
Yeah, I would say when it really started for me is when I would take a broker out that had done a really big deal I just heard about. That was the cool part, because they'd already gotten the deal, they had that success, and then they were saying, okay, here's some of that. Now, some people didn't disclose after that, but for me, like who do you prospect? What makes the most sense? And so that's the undefinable. And I don't want to make it sound like it's something romantic,
right.
But it's amazing. You'll meet people and you start talking about something, and then immediately, they think about things a unique way.
Mm-hmm.
They like to hear your perspective too. And so I don't know. It's just, that's the best part about our business, particularly development, right? It's that you can just find these matches, and and so I've had the same thing happen with certain consultants.
Mm-hmm.
It's where you kind of talk the same language, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it went from, a very normal call to you got deep on this one issue, say on a code issue, or you're talking to a geotech and you start getting deep on like, why does this soil work? Why does this not work? And you go, hey, we need to go to lunch.
Yeah.
You're right. Cause they go,
it clicks.
Yeah. And they know, cause they know they've got something to offer, but it's like one of those things where, yeah, we'll work together one day. I don't know if it's tomorrow, the next day. And I think that's what is hard when you're younger and you're newer and you're prospecting. And you just get these deeper conversations. Pete, those are the real meaningful relationships. And that's honestly what makes our business good. I only work with consultants and people I like now.
Yeah.
And when I first started, I had to work for a few owners that were, right. It didn't lease in a month and they were yelling at you.
Sure.
Right. Now it's like, okay.
Right.
The architects, engineers, civils, and really too, as I get deeper into my business now, you were asking me kind of how do I prospect now? To kind of go back to that, it is fascinating, because I think there are some people that prospect by calling other owners, and so there's always unique ways. The two biggest deals I've ever done since I started my own company 5 years ago were brokers that called me out of the blue, and they were actually one guy down in South Florida, and he didn't really even know what he was trying to sell me, but he understood land use.
Yeah.
And he knew this area was going to get brought inside the UDB. So it's outside of it. So urban development boundary down in Miami, you can't. But anyway, and he's like, would you meet me? And I'm like, whatever. I was Mr. Cool. I was working for another company. But anyway, and I said, yeah, let's meet. And within 5 minutes, he started explaining it to me. And I was like, okay, you've got a real deal. And that was Frank Lago. Great guy. So same thing, broker called me out of the blue on a site we're working on still right now down in Sterling on Sterling Road down in Hollywood. Guy calls me out of the blue, said, I saw your face in the paper. And I said, okay. And I don't know if you know this, but I really don't like being all over LinkedIn or all over whatever, because I just don't see the value, but it's out there.
Yeah. That's interesting, because that's how I first met you. So I don't know if you remember this, but first I want to preface, just so everybody knows, like, we haven't worked together yet. Right. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it was a year ago, 2 years ago, man, this time flies. Maybe 2.5 years ago, there was an OBJ article about you, I guess the development that you had. It might've been a Popka, I don't know, or North Star or something. Yeah. And I was just like, this is a guy that I want to know. Like, so I just cold emailed you or something. And then we met for coffee. And then and very little times that we've had lunch or coffee or whatever, like, we don't really talk about work a ton, and I don't know. I think that's something there. Like, sometimes you do, especially early on, have to just kind of reach out. But, in my opinion, if you said yes to this podcast, you say yes to other lunches and stuff, like there's obviously, some type of, speaking the same language that's going on, even though we haven't worked together. Today's episode is brought to you by Bryce Knuth of Insurance Office of America. As a contractor or real estate owner in Florida, you've likely experienced the impact of rising insurance premiums year after year. With the challenging insurance marketplace, having a specialist who focuses on your industry is critical now more than ever before. If you'd like a second set of eyes on your current insurance program or don't have a relationship with your current broker, please contact Bryce Knuth at 407-697-6944 via call or text, or email bryce.knuth@ioausa.com. Don't let rising insurance costs catch you off guard. Reach out to Bryce today. So how, as you kind of progress through your career, like into development, how would you say that, like your strategy in moving forward, and like, how do you pick a subconsultant? How do you find a broker that you want to work for or work with?
Yeah. So, there's a couple of components to it, right? So when I started my own company, you always have to have a strategy, right? And so my strategy was probably born from one site I did down in Miami, right? And on that site, it was this broker I told you about, bringing it into the UDB, and it was the best deal I'd ever done. And I suddenly said, that's going to be my deal. My deal is complex projects that are a little bit painful, but once you can figure that out and unlock the value, you're in. And so I made some mistakes early on when I first started the company, and I picked consultants that I liked, but that, I was all about the dollar. And so, oh gosh, this guy's $1,000 more than this guy.
That never works.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't even matter, because by the time that the person you picked who was cheaper, they make a $10,000 mistake, you could have paid $1,000 more and gotten the best in the business. Sure. And so, and trust me, we make mistakes every day. So I don't. The consultants we work with make very few mistakes relative to the mistakes I make and my partner makes. And so, now it is all about smaller shops. And so, and there's some people that love big firms, because if your local group can't do it, they can sub out some of the work to another office.
Sure. I
don't believe in that.
Why?
Because it just never works. A handoff like that is usually pretty sloppy. It's just, I've never seen it work in real life. And quite honestly, the local groups I've worked with are local, but local doesn't mean small, like they don't have, right, Sure. the horsepower. And so I think of, like, here in Orlando, FEG, they've got 30 plus engineers working for them. And C4, where they've got, I think, at least more than that. And so that's kind of the goal is horsepower, local. And so when I'm down in South Florida, I'm using a different group quite often too.
There's a ton of value to that too, being local, right? Like, you can just show up at their office, and I mean, now you got some developers that do work all over the country, right? So sometimes it's a little harder, and a lot of times they'll pick the bigger shop because there's offices all over. Especially if they've got big tracks, like your Pulte or something like that, So let's get into kind of just development. Like, what made you want to start Cadence?
Yeah. So, and that was earlier on. So I, when I was a broker at Lincoln, and that was a long time ago, we're talking like 05 is probably one of my last full year there. And I would watch, I would, kind of listen in, sit in on their deals, and you could see the JV piece, and then there's promotes, and some other stuff. We're not going to get into that today, but then you're like, at that point, I didn't understand it, but I was certainly like, okay, that's interesting.
Googling, what's promote?
Exactly, what's a promote? And I'm like, I don't understand the definition. We're in trouble. I'm the slowest learner out there, but at least if you're always trying to learn, I think there's people that kind of stop. So that's unrelated to the question you just asked me. But anyway, so interest in development. And so then I started saying, okay, what do I do? And this is for the podcast in particular. And people always go, how did you start? What do you do? What do you do? So when I was at Lincoln, I had a buddy bring me a deal, and it was the building I'm in now. It's the one asset I still own all these years. It was on Virginia Drive, and it was a 7,000 square foot building. And he's like, we can buy this for 250 grand. And I was like, that's ridiculous, Oh my God. And then we added up another, and we spent another though 400 or something like that fixing it up. And that's kind of what I would tell people is find a partner or two or three. The partnership's not going to go great because you're not used to being partners with this person probably. And so try to plan ahead, and then go find something that you can both buy that's not going to sink you. Mm-hmm. Now I found the investor. So he found the asset. I found the investor. We kind of worked together on the design. And then he took an office space in that building and then leased it for us. And then we had a great group at the time, kind of help us develop the building. It was Mark Hutton. And he helped me when he shouldn't have. And I'm sure spent tons of time and effort. But anyway, that's what you need. You need a little bit of luck too. But yeah, that's what started me off on, okay, I can buy assets, reposition them, and then that makes sense. What's odd is now all I do is ground up.
Right.
But
and you don't do office either.
I don't do office, and I don't think I'm going to be anytime soon. It's a little hard to find equity. But that started it. And then the next step was at Liberty. Found one or two more assets, but really went through a 5-year period where I didn't acquire anything, and I felt like a failure.
Yeah.
And then about the time I was leaving Liberty, which was 2010, there's a group that approached me, a local family that used to own a taxi cab business, and they said, we want to start putting out this kind of money each year. And it was like,
we're going to buy
15
cabs
million.
And you're all going to drive them.
Yeah, right. That's about what I was qualified to do. Honestly, when you look back, and I tell this to people too, and that is, if you don't think you're ready for it, then that's the right feeling. Sure. Whatever you're about to do, you shouldn't be ready for it. Right. People are probably like, should I take this job? I don't know what I'm doing. The answer is, you're right. Good. If you knew what you're doing, you shouldn't. It's a lateral job. So yeah, get uncomfortable. You can find people to give you advice, but you're going to get uncomfortable. You got to take some risk, and that's what it comes down to. But I found that group, and we put out like 15 million a year for about 4 to 5 years in a row. They let me invest in the deals, and so that was kind of the next step. So So all along, kind of like we talked about prospecting, you're doing these deals. You're like, okay, am I going to do a bunch of Virginia Drive deals? That one little strip center. Well, there weren't that many out there to do. Right. I waited 5 years, and then I started doing this thing where we were buying assets that were mostly REO, even though, right? And they were challenged, and we repositioned them. And so then that happened, and then I went to work for a company called DCT Industrial, and again, was not qualified. They let me run Florida. And so there you're doing some asset management, leasing, just getting them full, making sure their tenants are paying, that sort of thing. But also you could acquire. So acquiring existing assets. So that was complementary. And then we went forward with development, and that was ground up. And that's where I had to learn the most.
So I want to dive, before we kind of wrap this up, I want to dive into that not making a lateral move, right? Because especially young professionals or even mid-level, right? It's all about climbing the ladder, trying to figure out what's next. How can I go there? How would you say would be the best way to prepare to not make a lateral move, but also when you, like, say you make a vertical move and then trying to figure it out as you go? So like once you're in that position, what's the best way to deal with that?
Yeah. So when I took that position at DCT, I remember I didn't know Miami at all. And they said, hey, go down there. And what the good part is, there was a guy who had kind of done it before me. And that's what it comes down to. You got to find the folks that are in your position. Just admit, like, I am overwhelmed, and be yourself. And it is amazing how much people will help you.
Yeah. Just be authentic.
That's right. Because covering it up with overconfidence, it doesn't work. And the good part is I was like, okay, I got to learn as much as I can. And really it comes down to two, the hard work. We all have learning curves. And kind of my approach is always, hey, I can either hit the learning curve at a steep pace and figure it out in about 6 months, or I can stretch it out and I'll kind of know what I'm doing in 2 years. And that's also because I don't, there's people that are so naturally smart. They just understand the numbers. For me, it's always took a little bit longer, but once I worked through it a gajillion times.
Right.
But yeah,
would you say that that's because being authentic, especially in this industry, you don't really see a ton.
you don't.
But would you say that that is something that, because a lot of people see, if you say I really don't know this, or like as a weakness, right? Would you say that that is a weakness or is not a weakness? And then how can it be positioned to not be a weakness? And how can someone prepare for that?
Yeah, I think I'll just give you my example,
Sure.
right? Because it doesn't work for everything. But the good part there is I would say, hey, I've never prepared an investment memo. What am I going to do here? And they would literally just go, there's 16 on the file, on the drive. Just go check them out. I checked out every single one of them, called people that had drafted them and said, how did you get to this? And how did you get to that? And I'm just trying to figure this thing out. Again, you're right about one thing. This industry doesn't support it, but I think when you get to the people that matter, I think that's when that changes. I think there's a lot of authentic people at higher levels. And if you just go approach them, you can really break them down. And that may be your superpower. I think the other thing is I think kind of an underlying theme here is prep. If you've reviewed it backwards and forwards, you're going to look good. It's the people that go in there. You're not totally prepared. You're kind of winging it. That's problematic. And then the third thing is I do think it is undersold how important a mentor is.
Sure.
I've been working, I didn't mean to, but there's been 2 or 3 people I went to Florida State for undergrad. And so there's a real estate program and they approached me and I was more than happy to help them. One, I helped a little bit. I don't think I did enough for them,
Sure.
but I tried. But there's one guy I'm mentoring now who approached me and I think it's going pretty well.
Why do you think mentorship is so important?
Oh gosh, it's because it's right. Like we've all been there.
Yeah.
You just look in somebody's, when somebody's calling you and saying, hey, I'd love some of your help. It's like, I'm not that important, but let me help you. It's just so easy. And I think there's also, I felt this way certainly when I was in law, but in development, there's not a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm.
It is a bit of a black box. Like people look at it, it's harder than it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, you got to have all these skill sets that are developed out before I think you can really do it well.
Sure.
How in the world do you get there?
Right. And there's a lot of experience that everybody keeps it close to your chest. I think that the authentic portion, just to kind of end on that note, I would agree to you that there is, once you start to get to the higher levels, the authenticity is greater. And I think because people start to get into a position of their career where they understood what it took. And so they want to be able to give that back. But I truly do believe that it's a two-way street. Specifically in our industry, it could be very, you have it's called imposter syndrome, right? Where it's like you're just trying to,
fake it till you make
fake it till you make it, right? But I think if people can be authentic with someone who may be a prospective mentor, and then they can also prepare, right? Like if you go to someone, like if I were to come to you and say, Todd, like I've got this deal, but I don't understand X, Y, and Z. And here's why. And here's the research that I did behind it. Here's the people that I called. That would give a level of understanding to you to say, okay, this guy has done his due diligence and he needs some help understanding it. And maybe I can bridge that gap. Whereas if I come to you and say, Todd, I don't understand this. And you say, why? And I'm just like, I just don't understand it. Well, then you're like, well, Branson, you didn't really do any due diligence. Maybe you need to try to understand it, put that effort in, and then maybe you can help.
Yeah, it has not worked out well when people call me and just help me.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you want me to do?
Right.
Versus, hey, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. What more can I do to get better?
Right.
And that's when you're like, okay, good. You get it.
Right. You're on the right track. I just need to help you with this missing piece.
That's right.
Right. So we're going to wrap up episode 1. We're going to jump into episode 2 with Todd Watson and talk about a little bit of development, what he's got going on, and some things in the future. So make sure to join us in episode 2.